And live from New York, it's Saturday night. Wait, no, that's not it, is it? We're talking about that other thing on cable, right? Cool. Welcome back, welcome back. Tonight's guest has been around since 1949. Its seat has been held by great legends like Johnny Carson, David Letterman, and Conan O'Brien. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome tonight's guest, Late Night Talk Shows. What's the soup, guys? Late Night TV, once America's nighttime routine. A place to see your favorite celebrity spill the beans on their guilty pleasures, dating rumors, and wacky airport mix-ups, now has become what feels like a very expensive YouTube channel that I think you can still watch on cable TV. In this video, I'm going to be going through the ups and downs of late night talk shows, from their beginnings and golden era to the 90s and 2000s pop and plastic era, to what it's now and what I think the future of late night looks like. And be sure to stay tuned because there's a super secret alternate timeline on the back of the board from someone who beat the odds and might just be showing us the future of late night. But before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe so I can keep my ferret collection growing. Without further ado, the golden era. Before Johnny Carson, there were what we now remember as variety shows. Variety shows were mostly known for having skits and sketches and having some sort of musical element and even maybe an interview here and there, but it was very much a far cry from what we know today as a scripted or formatted late night TV talk show. With shows like the now super famous Ed Sullivan Show that gave us great performances by musical acts like a little band called The Beatles and the King of Rock Elvis, which then gave way to what we consider the first attempt at what we know today as a late night talk show with Faye Emerson. Kind of crazy, right? To think that the first late night talk show was from a woman. Pretty cool. But if you go back to look at some of these old clips, you see that TV or the DNA of these shows were still finding their footing. It wasn't exactly what we see today, but we can see early remnants of what it was going to turn into. But that then gave way to Johnny Carson, which inherited and helped kind of create the Tonight Show. And this is where we see this form of content or this form of talk show format come to be. And it's basically the same as we see today, which is a monologue with some stand-up comedy speaking about current events, some sort of music act at some point in the programming, and the staple of every late night talk show, a desk and an interview with a celebrity, accompanied by a sidekick. And it's honestly really cool to go back and look at these old TV shows or talk shows with a legend like Johnny Carson because it feels like so sophisticated and its humor is just like classy, dare I say. And maybe it's just because we're looking back at a time that just seemed more dignified, even though it probably wasn't. But don't get me wrong, if you go back, it just looks like you needed to be in a tuxedo to go on these shows, which it didn't, but it just felt like that. And I think that was just a lot of Johnny Carson's personality and Johnny Carson's je ne sais quoi or X factor that made it feel so unique and special. And also it's important to note that this is when we see these comedians or comedy writers take on this role of storytellers and interviewers, right? And it also gave a platform for other comedians to become big. For example, in the Johnny Carson show, there were huge acts that became popular and were launching pads in their careers like Joan Rivers, Eddie Murphy, and if you saw my last video, you'd probably now know Jim Carrey. With a lot of these comedians, actors, musicians, you'd see them perform or you would see them come on and plug or talk about their current projects. And it was the only time that families around the world, or specifically the US, were starting to see their favorite characters open up and talk about their personal lives. And we got a glimpse of what was behind the curtain. It felt spontaneous and it felt authentic, if that makes sense. Like I said, you'd see a comedian come on, tell their set, and then sit down and talk to Johnny Carson for a little bit and tell them a little bit more about themselves. Or a musician perform one of your favorite songs and then again sit down and just talk about the process a little bit. So if you're an aspiring musician or an aspiring artist, you got a chance to see your favorite people at work and then talk about it a little bit so you could learn or you could plug that into your process. And it was with Johnny Carson that there were other late night talk shows, but none as prevalent as him. But it was him and this era that locked in this format that, like I said, is still used today. And it was in the Johnny Carson show that we saw two comedians that would repeatedly come on and eventually get their own shows. And that is David Letterman and Jay Leno. Jay Leno hosted, I think, over 300 episodes of The Tonight Show while Carson was the host. And people seemed to really like him. But it wasn't until David Letterman got The Late Show that audiences fell in love with Letterman. Everyone knew that eventually Carson was going to retire, which he started hinting at 5 years before his retirement. And that's when speculation started just to percolate, saying who's going to take over? Is it going to be Letterman or is it going to be Leno? And that was when we saw Jay Leno's real colors come by a little bit. Letterman has said that while he was the favorite to take over for Carson, after Carson, Jay Leno managed to close a backroom deal due to his ties to the studio executives and the people making decisions, which ultimately led to Letterman leaving NBC and going to CBS to then get handed his own show. And Johnny Carson was on for a while too, it's worth mentioning. He was on from 1962 to 1992. So it wasn't until 1992 that Jay Leno took over. Letterman left for CBS, and a small SNL and Simpsons writer going by the name of Conan O'Brien took over The Late Show that used to be hosted by David Letterman. And Conan's show was its own thing. It was nothing like it was before. It wasn't highbrow. It wasn't taking itself too seriously. It was fun. It was adventurous. It felt youthful and just absurdist humor. And it really felt like the voice of the youth at the time. And not just any youth, the weird youth. He had weird reoccurring characters like the masturbating bear. And he involved everyone in his cast. I remember one of the funniest things I saw was him going with one of the people on his team to go check out apartments in New York. That was hilarious. Or when he decided to go spend the day with Hunter S. Thompson on his ranch. And you can just see the fear but admiration in Conan's eyes. Might I say a youthful Conan's eyes. Which takes us to our next era. And this era is kind of divided by two. Because while it was still very exciting, it's when you started to see the cracks come between the asphalt. Or I don't know what the saying is, but you get it. And that's the pop/plastic era. And you're probably wondering, like, why are you calling it the pop or plastic era? And I think that's because of the times that came with it. While the golden era is mostly reminded by the Carson era, which ended in 92, and then a little bit of the early 2000s with Conan, Letterman, and Leno, this part was fully the 2000s. And if you remember the 2000s, there was this like fame obsession. People just held celebrities in very high regards, in a very toxic level. It seems like everyone just had these parasocial relationships with magazines like People and Star. I've never read those, but I remember People was a big one. And then with networks like the E! Network, which was just extra celebrity gossip and celebrity news, and TMZ going bananas. Well, you can expect that this format and these shows exploded in popularity because this is where all the celebrities were going, and it was cool for celebrities to go there and open up a little and tell stories and maybe even be a little raunchier. And what do I mean by raunchier? Well, this is when two huge new players came into the mix. While here we see three huge names, Leno, Conan, and Letterman, here we see one more person come into the mix, and that's Jimmy Kimmel. He came and took over ABC's late night talk show duty, and his show just felt a little more late nighty and riskier, if that makes sense. And then also Craig Ferguson came into the mix 2 years later in 2005, which he was also just like very tongue-in-cheek. You know, there was something that felt very like flirty but fun, dare I say, or just raunchy, you know, and inappropriate for kids, but it would go over their heads kind of comedy. And it was with Jimmy Kimmel and Craig Ferguson's edition that we see this new evolution come along. And I think that it was introduced by the early 2000s with the pop era. But there was also another player that wasn't necessarily a person, and that was the internet. The internet was being created, and this really cool website that you might have heard of before by the name of YouTube came along, where people were uploading clips and shorts and different parts of the late night talk shows that they found interesting. So people were interacting with this medium in a whole new way. So there were more punchlines and there were more viral moments. I think the best way, or the best thing I can think about of how to describe this era, is if you go back and watch Entourage. There's an episode where Vinny goes on Jimmy Kimmel. I think that's what represents, or what best represents, this era of late night TV. It just felt very like the cool kid sitting at the cool table and talking about cool kids stuff. You know, people were talking about dating rumors, people were misbehaving. There's that famous Drew Barrymore interview where I think she flashes Letterman at some point. Things just felt authentic, and things felt like they could go off the rails at any point. It felt controversial. It didn't feel fabricated. It didn't feel like it was overly planned. That led to some controversial, or I don't think the word is controversial, just very like chaotic moments. And it's not till the late 2000s, like 2009 and early 2010s with 2010, that we see the train start to go off its rails a little bit. And I don't think you can better introduce this second part, which I would call the plastic era, than with the retirement of the two greats of, let me rephrase that, one of the greats and one of the I don't like him so much, which is David Letterman and Jay Leno. When they left, they just left a vacuum and these impossible shoes to fill, because Leno and Letterman just were so authentic. Even though I don't like Leno, I can't admit that he was so authentic and good at his job. But it was time for them to move on. Letterman stepped away and Leno stepped away, but there was still one key player from the trifecta, which was Conan O'Brien, which was supposed to take over Jay Leno's show, The Tonight Show, which was the most coveted of all late night TV, because that was where Johnny Carson was in his time. But Leno decided that he wanted to do something different, something bigger, and they gave him, or created this thing called the Jay Leno Show or something like that freaking tanked and no one liked. So they gave Conan a whole big 7 months of the Tonight Show before they moved it back into the night so that time slot could be given to Jay Leno in this new format, or this new show that ended up tanking Conan's ratings, eventually putting him out of his position as the Tonight Show host. So much like he did Letterman in the 90s, he's now doing the same thing to Conan in 2014, which led to Conan doing the most self-respecting, cool thing I've ever heard of anyone do, which is he politely renounced with NBC, didn't talk shit, didn't have this big spectacle or outcry pointing at them and calling it unfair. And instead, he put everyone on his writing team and most of his staff on his personal payroll while he figured out what his next move was, which was incredibly ambitious and crazy at the time, which is that he went to a much smaller organization, which is TBS, and they created Conan, which, as we all know today, was a swing, but it was the right freaking swing. In hindsight, like I said, this was absolute and total creative freedom from Conan, because he basically, first of all, moved to LA, which, funny enough, if you don't know, Johnny Carson's Tonight Show started off in New York, but then he moved it to LA. So he kind of replicated Carson's trajectory in starting in New York and then moving his show to LA in a much darker manner, because they kind of forced him to. That's where he kind of found his rhythm. We kind of saw him be able to go back to his late night TV show antics and be able to just do most of the office shenanigans that we now love him for. I think that what was so awesome about Conan is that while his celebrity interviews were and are freaking awesome, it was some of his sketches with his staff and his team that won over our hearts, like Jordan Schlansky or Sonia, or when he would just go around literally creating chaos around his office, figuring out who he was going to fire, figuring out who could save him in case there was a fire in the building. Even today, I think that Conan's interactions with Jordan Schlansky are some of the funniest things that he's ever had to offer, and that all became possible because the freedom and liberty that he had with TBS, that no one really expected anything from him. They just expected him to be him. And what's also important to know is that Leno's return to The Tonight Show was short-lived because he was running on fumes. People didn't really mess with Leno to begin with. He was the third most popular talk show host when they were all three on the air. So when he came back and everyone heard what he did to Conan, well, obviously everyone was soured by his antics. Especially Jimmy Kimmel was known for legitimately just telling him to his face that he was an asshole. And obviously Letterman didn't hold back either and gave him a piece of his mind on his show many a times. NBC needed to find a replacement for Leno again, and they went with another SNL alumni, but someone who was on the cast, and they chose
couple months to repick.
Jimmy freaking Fallon, the hyena, as I like to call him. His introduction was also accompanied by a bunch of others like Stephen Colbert, who used to be on The Daily Show with his variety show or his political satire show, The Colbert Report, which was freaking awesome. It was just a spoof on like conservatives in a way that he was like cosplaying as one of them. And it's awesome. If you've never watched it, you should check it out. Another SNL great with Seth Meyers, who's I think his show is the one I like the most. I don't know if it's just because I really liked him on SNL as the weekend correspondent guy, but I still to this day, I think it's the one I still enjoy watching the most. I like his takes, and even he has some in-office sketches that are funny. There's a really funny one with Larry David, where Larry David goes in to write for his team, and it feels like an episode straight out of Curb. It's really funny. You should check it out. But also with who I think is the most underwhelming and realistically the most succulous, the most pompous cat of the Cats movie, a gimmicky, rude James freaking Corden.
But when you come up and present an award, just get on with it. There we go.
Who had... Honestly, I think he did win me over at first when he did those one or two carpool karaokes with the Biebs. But once he just like started leaning hard into that, it was just like, oh my God, this guy's such a hack. But he did do something great, which is something I'm just going to lightly touch on because I know some of you watch late night talk shows on the other side of the pond. And that's a whole nother video that I also want to touch on at some point. But if you've ever watched late night talk shows in the UK or across the pond, you've realized that their format is a little different. They'll have the interviewer and then they'll have a couch with a bunch of different celebrities and they all interact between them, and it feels more like a dinner party or like a drinks party than a talk show. So James Corden brought that element into his late show along with Fill Your Guts or Spill Your Guts, which again started off okay but then slowly just became gimmicky and more planned. And you know, you could tell that their publicists and like the people's publicists would intervene before they even did it, so everything was like pre-planned and premeditated. I don't know, it just got stale really quick. As well as with the carpool karaoke, I just couldn't stand seeing James Corden sing his heart out next to ex singer or ex celebrity and use the same old recycled jokes and persona. It just felt tacky and played out. And then they found out that he wasn't even driving, that he was being like told around. And then all these news stories came out of him being like extremely rude to like wait staff and being like really mean to the people that work for him. There's a Fill Your Guts and Spill Your Guts where he doesn't know like any of the camera people's names.
Name 2 of the cameramen in this room.
It's a different crew tonight, actually.
And then you compare that with someone like Conan or even someone like Letterman, where it just felt like such a small organization where everyone knew each other, even though it's probably as big or bigger than Corden's show. And don't get me wrong, even in this plastic era, there were still some great moments. Like, I think that some of my favorite interview moments are even in this plastic era. Like, specifically, I really like when Will Ferrell would go on all these different late night talk shows and come in as a different character or even as himself, but just a little outrageous. One where he comes in with like a parrot on his shoulder and he refuses to acknowledge it. Then another one where he comes in painted like a tiger from a kid's birthday party. Then one with like women's sunglasses. And then there's one, I think in Jimmy Fallon, where he comes in as Little Debbie from the Little Debbie cakes that you find at the supermarket. And that's hilarious. And that was all in the pop era. Then there's Kristen Wiig, is another person who had great moments on this plastic era. Like when she went into one of these talk shows dressed as Michael Jordan and pretended to be Michael Jordan the whole interview. That was honestly hilarious. So I'm not saying that this era was all bad, but here's where we see everything just get more homogenized and everyone just kind of like start adopting this sterilized version of what it used to be. It just seemed like everyone's publicists came in before the interview and kind of just like pre-scripted it. So it felt more like a performance than a genuine conversation, which is what it used to feel like. And it was also around this time that political satire talk shows started taking off, like The Daily Show or that Bill Maher show on HBO. Even Last Week Tonight, I think, did start around that. So the popularity of that grew, and that kind of led to these late night talk shows also adopting a more political outlook or a more political feeling to them, which I think drew a lot of longtime fans away. And not necessarily because they disagreed with the politics. I just think that politics, specifically now and recently, have just been so polarizing and emotionally exhausting a lot of times. We just don't necessarily want to find another outlet that's reminding us of how shitty some things are, if that makes sense. And while I appreciate them shedding light on a lot of like important issues that I totally think definitely do need to be talked about or exposed, I think that with the current news cycle, it just felt like another way to not be able to escape the news. So in my opinion, I don't think that's necessarily the politics of it. I just think it's the medium started getting a little washed and a little outdated. And there was also one key element that started kind of just like losing its relevancy or losing its importance, which is the celebrity interview portion of the show. And still, I think that was because of this ad-friendly environment that they wanted to create, and they didn't want to lose their sponsorships and their advertising partners. And also probably a lot of these publicists that had all these rules set on what they could or couldn't talk about, and they had probably their clients acting in a very specific way to sell more movie tickets or concert tickets or whatever they were there to plug. And while the celebrity interview element of all of this was on the decline, it was on the up and up somewhere else. It was on the rise. And that's where the future and the present of celebrity talk shows is right now. That I think is best exemplified by internet shows like Hot Ones or Chicken Date Shop or Wired's Autocomplete Interview, the Actor on Actors internet show. Because with shows like Hot Ones, it just feels like these celebrities are being more vulnerable. They're all getting spicy chicken, and I think they let their guard down and show a version of themselves that seems more human and approachable, which seems to attract people who admire them because it lets people relate to the people that they admire, to these celebrities that they admire. In Chicken Date Shop with Amelia de Moldenberg, I think I'm pronouncing it right, also, we see someone take a new approach to these interviews with this flirty, funny, awkward interview style that lets a lot of these singers or actors or celebrities kind of play off of this comedic person who lets them play off of her in a really cool and fun way that also has this like date element to it, which I think we've all been on an awkward date. So seeing people in awkward situations reacting similar to how we would react in awkward situations is endearing. Then with the Wired Autocomplete Interview, it's like they're asking the questions we really want to know because it's literally the most Googled questions on that celebrity. So it's questions that we've all Googled, or some of us have Googled at some point if we have ever admired anyone in this like entertainment space, right? And then with Variety's Actors on Actors, we see peers asking peers questions. So if you're maybe an aspiring actor and you want to know about someone's methods or someone's process or someone's whatever, you're seeing someone who knows the craft ask someone else who knows the craft questions, which leads to more interesting takes and also longer formats that don't necessarily have to abide by old TV standards that are super outplayed, and they can swear or they can just speak freely without also having to worry about an ad break or whatever, which interrupts the flow of conversation. And then finally, I think the biggest culprit of the death of late night, which is podcasts. And realistically, there are millions of podcasts, some great, some not great. But these podcasts do give the same thing as these other internet shows an opportunity, which is conversation, long form conversation. And we get to see a lot of these people we admire actually talk about what they're passionate about and get a real sense of who they are as humans, not this polished version that their PR team put together to sell more tickets. There's that one new one from Amy Poehler. Amy Poehler from SNL and from Parks and Rec has a super fun podcast that I really like to watch because it usually has a lot of people and comedians that I like. They chop it up in a way that just seems fun and exciting, and it's like just two friends hanging out. A lot of times they know each other or have worked together, so I'd much rather watch them talk than see James Corden attempt to put like fish eyes in their mouth. So here's my take. My take isn't that late night's gone or that I think that any of these talk show hosts are bad. The medium is outdated. All the restrictions and all the bureaucracy that goes into late night, all the money that goes into producing these shows is so high, and there's so much red tape that I think that ultimately they would be better off switching over to these new formats where I think they would have more freedom to traverse and navigate these conversations and these variety shows in a way that they would like, that would feel more authentic to us and to them, I think. And there's one person who has done it perfectly, and we're gonna go and switch the board over to the super secret part of this video. And that, my friends, is Conan O'Brien. We've already talked a lot about Conan in this video, but I kind of think that he deserves all the freaking flowers. And I even did his little logo. If this ever gets to Conan, hope you appreciate that I took the time to do this, because you rock, dude, and I really like everything you've done. From early late night TV with The Late Show, to The Tonight Show, the very short-lived Tonight Show, to his time in TBS, to now his newest endeavor, which is Conan Needs a Friend, as well as an HBO show that's amazing about him traveling. One episode where he goes to Argentina with Jordan Schlansky, and you get that amazing Schlansky-Conan chemistry that we all have grown to love so much.
It's Tongo. It's not Tongo! These people live here!
It's him that we see that has completely stayed ahead of the curve. His early days in the late night, then going to the Tonight Show, to then going to TBS, where he had just all this creative freedom, and he left TBS in 2021, right before everyone started realizing that maybe they were getting tired of it. He left, and he decided to do a podcast, which is great. He has all the interviews with all the celebrities who all have gotten to know and love him through the years of him being a late night talk show host. He has the skills of a veteran interviewer and talk show host, so the conversations never run stale, the conversations never run dry. He's an amazing comedian and writer, so me, someone who appreciates comedy, gets to see a master at work talking about his craft, keeping it fresh and funny. And something I've always liked about Conan too is he never punches down, he always punches up. He's always the butt of the joke, and that's never been more relevant or present than when you see him interact in the podcast. He has Sonia, who was his assistant for the longest time, and she's a co-host. And then we see Jordan come in, and they have these like long 30 to 1 hour long podcasts where they review Jordan's favorite nose trimmer or Jordan's favorite toilet paper. It's just pure comedy gold. So with Conan, we see someone that didn't get killed by late night TV or didn't kill late night TV, but instead transcended it. This is someone who chose freedom over fame, and it paid off big time. And there's an even really funny segment in his most recent podcast, which was a live podcast, that he's kind of bringing back late night. Just, he has an audience, he has a band, he has a live element. It's all done like a retransformation. It's like that thing where everything evolves. If everything evolves long enough, it becomes a crab. Well, this happened again, right?
I am right back where I started. Welcome to Late Night with Conan O'Brien.
But anyway, that's going to be it for this show. That's going to be it for this video. Sorry. Too in character, apparently. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any favorite late night TV show moments or talk show moments, or what you think is in store, or what's the next chapter of this medium. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Send this video to your porcupine, your badminton coach, and the microwave. Peace.